Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the origins of the Lebanon Crisis and its dysfunctional political system. Lebanon is blowing up. In the wake of the Beirut explosion, mass protests have returned to Lebanon. The economic crisis, the pandemic, and now the Beirut explosion have completely exposed the weaknesses of Lebanon's dysfunctional political system. How did it get to this point? What is it about Lebanon's political system that makes it so dysfunctional? And what alternatives are there to fix it? All that in this video. Just before we start, don't forget to subscribe for more political analysis videos every week and hit that bell notification while you're at it. As most of you already know, the massive explosion that hit the port of Beirut in Lebanon was caused by the storage of ammonium nitrate that had irresponsibly been left in the port for over 6 years. The ammonium nitrate had been confiscated from a Russian ship, and officials knew that it was there for the last 6 years. Customs officials tried to get a court order from a judge to get rid of the ammonium nitrate, but they were ignored even after sending multiple requests over the years. Beirut's port is known for its corruption, and the locals call it the Cave of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. And it's this kind of bureaucratic incompetence that is emblematic of the Lebanese political system. And that's why protests have returned to the country, demanding the resignation of the government. The Prime Minister has already resigned. Now, if you'll remember, back in October 2019, there were also mass protests in Lebanon against the government because of the economic crisis that Lebanon's politicians have created. Youth unemployment in Lebanon is at 37%. The country is massively in debt with a debt-to-GDP ratio of 170%, the third highest in the world. The debt comes from loans to finance the reconstruction after the Lebanese civil war and to finance its reliance on imports and the government's oversized wage bill. Interest payments on the debt consume half the government's revenue. The World Bank estimates that corruption costs Lebanon 15% of its GDP every year. And so when Lebanon defaulted on its debt, the Lebanese pound lost 85% of its value. And the government can't even provide basic services like electricity and garbage disposal. In an effort to generate revenue to pay back the debt, the Lebanese government created a massively unpopular WhatsApp tax. This tax, combined with the economic situation and corruption, led to mass protests in October 2019 that forced the resignation of Prime Minister Saad Hariri. In January of 2020, a new government was formed to fix the problems. But then, the country was hit by a global pandemic, and the economic crisis got even worse, leading to a new wave of protests. And now with the explosion, over 200 have been killed, 5,000 injured, 300,000 are homeless, and there's $15 billion in economic damage. Money which Lebanon doesn't have. The country is already heavily in debt, and international lenders are not about to give it more money. So how did the country get to this point in the first place? What is it about Lebanon's political system that is so dysfunctional and so damaging to the economy? Lebanon is an extremely diverse country with over 18 different religious groups, including 12 different types of Christian, 4 types of Muslim, Jews, and Druze. Christians are 40% of the population, with Maronite Christians being 21%. Sunni Muslims are 27%, Shia Muslims are also 27%, and Druze are 5%. And Lebanon's political system is meant to reflect this diversity. As far back as the 1800s, during the days of the Ottoman Empire, and later the French Mandate, political offices in Lebanon were allocated along sectarian lines. This system became formalized at independence from France in 1943, when Lebanon established the National Pact, which stipulated that political power in Lebanon would be divided along religious lines. The president would always be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament a Shia Muslim. And seats in parliament and all administrative posts in government would be allocated at a ratio of 6 Christians to every 5 Muslims, in accordance with the 1932 census. Now, at the time when this was created, Christians were still the majority, and Christians also tended to dominate the economy. But as the share of Christians in the population declined, while Christians still held economic and political power, this produced tensions between religious groups who wanted more equal representation. These tensions, together with the influx of Palestinian refugees and fighters in the 1970s, led to the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War, which lasted from 1975 until 1990. This brutal civil war was fought along sectarian lines and reinforced the religious divide that existed in Lebanon. Now, in 1990, the Taif Agreement brought peace to the country and created a new political system that was basically the same as the old one. The only difference was that Parliament would now be divided equally between Christians and Muslims. But just like in the old system, all administrative posts would be allocated along religious lines, and political candidates only compete in elections against people from the same religious sect. So, for example, if you are a Maronite Christian, you can only choose between different Maronite Christian candidates. And so after the Civil War, what happened was that all of the same religious-based warlords that had fought the Civil War became the ruling elite of the country and remained in power and got rich in the process. Now, you might be asking, what's so bad about this system? Surely in a divided country like Lebanon, power sharing is a good idea. And that's true. But the system also creates many problems. Number one is with the allocation of administrative posts in government. People are promoted based on religious identity rather than merit or ability, which creates nepotism and breeds the kind of bureaucratic incompetence that allowed the explosion to happen. Number two is that it creates gridlock. The Lebanese political system allows the minority to veto any legislation, and a two-thirds majority in the cabinet is required to make any important decisions. Rather than leading to compromise and consensus, this creates massive political gridlock where nothing ever gets done. A good example is that the budget took 12 years to be approved. Now, for my American viewers, imagine having a government shutdown for 12 years. Then you'll understand why Lebanese people are angry. And so it's unsurprising that under this system, even the most basic things that government is supposed to do don't get done. Lebanon has had consistent power outages since 1975. When the garbage dump in Beirut closed in 2015, the various political sects couldn't agree on a new method for garbage disposal, and so now the city of Beirut is filled with trash and the water is polluted, which has destroyed the livelihoods of fishermen. If government can't even get basic things done like clearing out the trash or keeping the lights on, then you have a dysfunctional political system. And because nothing ever gets done in Lebanon, the government can't introduce the necessary reforms to fix the economy, leading to the situation today. Number three is that it creates clientalism, a kind of patronage system. You see, after the war, the Lebanese state did not have much in the way of social services, and so sectarian leaders have created their own networks and religious-based charities that provide all sorts of services that the government is meant to provide, like education, healthcare, and access to government jobs. And because sectarian leaders control access to social services and welfare, this creates a dependence on sectarian leaders and reinforces sectarianism. So sectarian leaders essentially buy votes in exchange for providing access to government jobs or healthcare or other services to members of their religion. And what this does is consistently keep the same elites in power. Most of Lebanon's politicians come from long-standing political dynasties. And it also destroys political competition, because anyone who tries to run on a non-sectarian platform will lose the election because they don't have the same ability to provide rewards to their supporters. And many poor people who might want to vote for another party don't, because they depend on the patronage benefits provided by the political party, which they don't get if they don't vote for them. And so what this does is ensure that government resources and government positions are used to reward supporters rather than benefit the country as a whole, which leads to corruption and nepotism and undermines the economy, as the necessary infrastructure and services that would benefit the country as a whole, rather than a particular sect, never get built. And because people are given government jobs in exchange for political support, this creates a bloated civil service. And so the government has to borrow more and more money to pay unnecessary people, which is one of the reasons the country is in debt. Number 4 is that it reinforces sectarian divisions. In Lebanon's political system, religion is the focus of everything. Your religion is written on your ID card, and you can only vote for candidates from your religious group. In this way, sectarian divisions are built into the system and don't allow for the formation of a more secular identity free from religion. When religion is politicized, religion becomes the only basis of political organization rather than ideology, class, or other issues. This ensures that any massive change in public opinion will never translate into different results at the ballot box, because only people's sectarian identities are represented. And that's why people are out on the streets, because the current form of Lebanese democracy does not allow them to voice their interests outside the sectarian framework. If everything is focused on religious identity, that gives people less of a reason to identify with the Lebanese nation as a whole, and so reinforces the division and mistrust between religious groups. But it's not just the sectarian political system that is the problem, it's also foreign intervention. During the Civil War, both Israel and Syria had illegally occupied large parts of Lebanon. After the Civil War ended, this remained, with 14,000 Syrian troops being stationed in Lebanon and Syria continuing to intervene in Lebanese politics after the war. Meanwhile, Israel continued to occupy the predominantly Shia southern Lebanon. Now, in the year 2000, Israeli forces were forced to withdraw by the Shia militant group and political party Hezbollah, which gave them a lot of popularity. Meanwhile, Syrian forces remained in the country. Dissatisfaction grew with foreign involvement in Lebanon, and so in 2005, during the Cedar Revolution, mass protests broke out against Syrian involvement in Lebanon, as well as the assassination of Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. And so Lebanon became divided on the issue of its relationship with Syria. On March 8, 2005, pro-Syria forces held a rally in favor of Syria. Days later, on March 14th, an even larger counter-rally was held against Syria, and this created the two political coalitions that dominate Lebanese politics today. The March 8 coalition is led by Christian President Michel Aoun and the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, and is supported by Iran and Syria. On the other side, the March 14 coalition is led by Sunni Prime Minister Saad Hariri, together with other Christian political parties, and is supported by Saudi Arabia and the West. Eventually, Syria was forced to withdraw, but these divisions continue to play a role in Lebanese politics. Foreign powers continue to intervene directly in Lebanon, with Iran funding Hezbollah and Saudi Arabia kidnapping the Lebanese Prime Minister when they didn't get their way. And so foreign involvement exacerbates the tensions between religious groups and ensures that the various Lebanese factions, rather than working in the interests of the Lebanese people, work first and foremost in the interests of their foreign backers. So what alternatives exist to this corrupt sectarian system that has led to the Lebanese crisis today? Many people have proposed abolishing the sectarian system altogether and allowing political parties to compete for votes freely across sectarian lines. In this way, you have an alternative form of citizenship that doesn't place religious identity at the center of everything. This would require the creation of non-sectarian political parties that draw support from across religious groups. And these kind of parties are already forming. The 2015 garbage crisis in Beirut led to the formation of the Beirut Madinati Party, which was non-sectarian and focused on bread and butter issues like cleaning up the garbage. They won 40% of the vote in Beirut during the 2016 municipal elections, despite massive obstacles. And this kind of civic, issues-based party seems to be a model for the future. It doesn't matter if you are Sunni, Christian, or Shia. Everyone needs the garbage cleaned and the electricity working. But there are challenges and problems with this. The establishment politicians who maintain their power through sectarian patronage networks stand to lose from this, and so they have an incentive to stop any kind of reform and maintain the status quo, which is why the protests are so important to put pressure on them. It's also very difficult for any non-sectarian party to win, because many people, especially the poor, depend on patronage benefits that politicians give to them, and so even if they want to, they can't afford to support another political party. Totally abolishing sectarianism could also create more problems. The current system is not really proportional. In case you didn't notice, half the seats are reserved for Christians, but Christians only make up 40% of the population. So switching to totally open elections would benefit some groups like Shias, but hurt others like Sunnis and Maronite Christians. On top of that, smaller minorities like the Druze or Greek Orthodox Christians would no longer have guaranteed representation, and so you could end up with the country being dominated by the biggest groups, at the expense of smaller groups. On top of that, although many in the younger generation and the current protests are non-sectarian, many Lebanese people still are, and so even with open elections, people could still end up just voting along sectarian religious lines. In the current system, it's not like each religious group only votes for one party. Shias can choose between Hezbollah and Amal, while Maronite Christians can choose between the Kataib Party and the Free Patriotic Movement. So in the current system, there is political competition within each sect, and these parties are genuinely different from each other. Finally, abolishing sectarianism could destroy the balance of power that currently exists in Lebanon and disrupt the country's fragile peace, which could be exploited by foreign powers. These are the kind of questions that the Lebanese people will have to ask themselves as they try to create a new political system. When individuals or groups of people are targeted on the basis of their identity, whether religious or otherwise, the political salience of that identity increases. The Lebanese will have to overcome this division, and in that endeavor, I wish them the best of luck. To learn about the origins of the Libyan civil war, check out my last video. Thank you to my Patreons for making this video possible. Like, share, and subscribe, because this was my take.